Hey everybody, we're back here with Miss Veruca Salt to talk about using subclaims to outline or structure your essay and to organize your examples.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my video.
Your video. Oh, really? Okay, all right. Let's make it your video. Let's use your very, very special case, Veruca, as an example. Let's figure out what the subclaims would be if we base an argument on your character. Let's use a similar argument to the one with Augustus, right? But maybe tailor to you a little bit. The text suggests that giving in to children's demands is a bad approach to parenting because it results in even more demands.
I don't know where you're getting this idea. This has nothing to do with me at all. I want a chocolate, Daddy.
Shut it, Veruca. So another way to think about subclaims is to think about that pie model that I talked about before, the pie model of paragraphs. Point, illustration, explanation. Well, a subclaim is like a point. It's the point that you're making. Each of those little subclaims is one of the points that you're going to have to demonstrate in your essay. In this case, it's very similar to Augustus. The first thing we need to show is that your parents, Veruca, give in to your demands. Then we would need to show that giving into those demands leads to more outrageous demands from you, Veruca. And finally, that the text presents that as a bad thing rather than something good, but as something that's like tragic or terrible or like just not good. Right. All right. So those are the three things that we need to show. Those are our three subclaims or our 3 points. So then we have those subclaims, right? And we'll think for each of those subclaims, we need to find evidence from the film. We need to find examples from the plot or direct quotes or moments, something that's going to support that subclaim. That's going to be our evidence. All right. So you can already see how the argument is starting to structure the paper. Each of those subclaims is something that you have to discuss. And they're kind of already in the order that you need to talk about them because the one thing leads to the next thing leads to the next thing. So you've already got a structure going on. So if we start with subclaim 1, which is the film shows the parents giving into Veruca your demands. Can you think, Veruca, of any times that you wanted something in the movie that your father gave in immediately?
I never get anything I want.
You sure about that? Because I feel like I remember some examples in the book of you getting what you want. Like a very big one at the beginning might be the golden ticket. Do you remember how you got your golden ticket, Veruca?
It took days for me to get the golden ticket. I wanted to be the first one, but I didn't even get to do that.
But your father put his entire factory on opening candy bars, right? And he bought thousands of bars to ensure that you would eventually find a ticket. And that takes a ton of money. And you were still unhappy and grateful after all of that effort. So he tried to placate you. He's apologizing to you in his office, even though he's doing everything possible to get you what you wanted. There wasn't anything else he could possibly do. Do you think that's a lot of giving in to your demand, Marika?
I never get anything that I want, Daddy.
Ugh, enough with the daddy stuff. Dang.
Daddy.
Ugh. In this class, though, in addition to just having an example, you also have to relate your ideas to contexts that inform your analysis. So, as you think of each example, the best way to make sure that you're integrating those contexts that I require you to discuss, like the adaptation theory or the new realism, the best way to integrate that is to consider those with each of the examples that you're going to be using. So in this case, the conventions of new realism is one of the contexts, and then adaptation theory, as discussed by Linda Hutchin, is the other, as we know. Okay, so as you consider each example, then consider how it relates to each of those two contexts. So does this example demonstrate any of the conventions of new realism? That's the first thing we would think about. So for me, the first thing I think of here is that Veruca's behavior does not represent her as innocent in the sense of the golden age, but instead it's an example of real world issues that may previously have been more taboo to represent. Like Veruca is a spoiled child.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You are far from being perfect.
I'm completely perfect. My daddy tells me so every single day.
Okay. All right. So we don't have the innocent, perfect child. If we think about how it's new realism, then the next thing we can do is think about how is it adaptation. You said your dad tells you. That's a good point. Per Hutchins' modes of engagement, the film is in the showing mode. So this means that we have to see all of the conflicts manifested through things like dialogue in the showing mode, dialogue, visual images, sounds, right? That's how things have to be represented in the showing mode. Watching you, Veruca, and your dad interact in the scene at the factory shows us their relationship dynamic. You're sitting in his chair like a queen or like the boss of the factory, and he's begging you. You're in the power position. You're in control both verbally and visually. That's one way you can bring in both the conventions of new realism and adaptation theory to that example. If you consider that for every example, then it's probably going to be more integrated. So then let's move to examples that demonstrate the second subclaimer point, that getting your way, Veruca, encourages you to continue asking for more and more outrageous things. I'm not going to bother asking her. One example of you continuing to demand things is when you get to the chocolate factory and you make your father promise to let you go in first, which he does. And then you repeatedly ask for things throughout the tour, including a live human being, an Oompa Loompa. That's a pretty clear indicator to me that your demands have gotten out of control when you want to buy a human being.
But you're proving my point. I never got an Oompa Loompa. I told you I never get anything I want, Daddy.
Knock off the daddy stuff. So then we look for how that shows us aspects of new realism or things that are related to adaptation theory. So here we go. With Veruca's behavior, rich people get to go first, right? This reflects an aspect of realistic class awareness or realism that Golden Age literature doesn't really address, especially when the wealth and privilege of characters like Veruca are contrasted with the poverty of Charlie. So that's an example of how, to me, it relates to new realism. We do see the continuation of Golden Age characteristics in the fantastic qualities of the factory. But then the realism kicks back in when we realize that Willy Wonka has basically imported slave labor in order to produce his materials. Bam, realism mixed with Golden Age fantasy. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There are plenty of places also, if you want to get into adaptation theory, to point to in terms of how the film depicts things visually rather than with description, as in the book. And plenty of places that involve subtraction or distillation. For example, one that involves subtraction in this particular scene, when Veruca is pushing her way to the front. Veruca gets to go first still, and her father actually literally pushes other humans out of the way to let her go. But Wonka doesn't insult Veruca in the film about her name, like he does in the book, which takes away a small moment when we might have had some sympathy for Veruca, because it's awkward what he says about her name. And if you don't remember, I encourage you to go look. So if she doesn't get insulted by Wonka, then there's no moment when we feel any sympathy for her at all. It just makes her even more distasteful, this subtraction of Wonka's insult.
He did what? What did he say about my name?
Oh, you didn't know he said that about you, huh, Veruca? Well, I guess you'll have to read the book to find out what he said. Okay, the other example then is the example of you wanting to purchase an Oompa Loompa. In terms of scene analysis, this shows the way that Veruca sees living beings as just another material possession for her to own. And it supports the subclaim in that it shows her demands getting more outrageous, from wanting to go first to wanting to own a human being. So this is a progression of outrageousness. And in new realism, then, it shows the extent to which wealth and greed might go in order to support itself. As we saw with Willy Wonka, he succeeds because he has enslaved people, which Veruca then supports in a colonialist way. Oh, let me buy one of those things. So that's the real result of privilege, the realistic result, rather than a more fanciful result like we might see in Alice, where she just falls asleep because she's tired, feeling lazy. And if we think about the adaptation aspect of it, then the addition of Violet Beauregard in the film, she turns around and she tells Veruca to can it at one point. And that shows the audience that her behavior is outrageous, because even other children can see how bad it is. Finally, we have to do the third subclaim or point, which is that the film presents or represents this parenting strategy as negative. The most obvious example of this is the scene where Veruca you sing your big song, I Want the World. This would be for me the most important scene for this argument if I were writing like prompt 1 where I had to pick a scene. Because from wanting to own a human, Veruca, you move to wanting the whole world. I want the world. I want the whole world. You become so greedy that your desire encompasses the entire world. What's left? There's literally nothing more that you could want than the whole world. I mean, I guess the universe, but it's a lot of want, a lot of demands. So this moment of extreme hubris, your song, Veruca, is followed immediately by your comeuppance. You're judged to be a bad egg and you fall into the garbage chute. Then your dad, who tries to save you, falls in too because he's also a bad egg. So your parent is implicated. First you're implicated, and then your parent is implicated. And then, to top it all off, the Oompa Loompas sing a song about how the mother and the father are to blame if the child is a brat. And the Oompa Loompas function as this moral signal in their songs. They reinforce Wonka's moral code, which in this case suggests the parents are bad. Wonka gets to determine the winner, so his opinion then ends up being one of the more privileged opinions in the text. Just like in the other examples, here you'd also look for places that reflect the conventions of New Realism or the principles of adaptation. So in the case of the bad egg for the parent and Veruca, this is the sort of final example or final moment where Veruca is represented as not innocent, where the notion that childhood is characterized by innocence is entirely deconstructed. Veruca is officially a bad egg. And the same thing with her father's behavior. In the wake of developmental psychology, in New Realism, the parents are there and their role is represented as impacting the children in a way that we don't see that happening in the Golden Age. So that father's role there becomes important and he's implicated as well. And finally, the Oompa Loompas sing a whole song about how bad they are as parents, which if you think about this in terms of adaptation theory, this is a performative mode, a showing mode. So the song enacts this moral message. We get to hear it and see it. This allows the director to create a particular vibe. Whereas we have to imagine the songs when we're reading. We may or may not imagine what they sound like with music. We're just reading them. This gives the song more influence and more power because it's there, it's in our face, and music is deeply connected to the emotions, and we remember music in really strong ways. So putting the song actually to music and then showing it to us, that substitution from the written to the showing mode empowers the song a lot and pushes that moral even more didactically or more in our face. So the Oompa Loompas function that way.
I don't care what those beastly Oompa Loompas say. I'm not a brat, Daddy.
So that's basically the idea. Your argument drives your essay. Even when I've asked you to focus on a particular scene or given you other parameters, it's still that argument that helps you decide, what do I talk about first? What examples do I need to use? Well, the examples are the ones that support the points, and the points are the ones that build up to your overall argument. So once you have those ideas down, then you have your essay. This is what some people call outlining. I know outlining is an icky term, but it's just taking a minute to think about, what do I need to demonstrate and what pieces of evidence can get me there, and how do I layer in those other elements that may be required. I'm going to show a picture here of the final outline. I've also got a link in the lesson to this final outline so that you can check it out for yourself. Maybe it'll help you kind of get a sense for how to organize things, right? And then you're going to practice this for your today's for the applied activity part of this lesson.
I can't imagine why anyone would call me a brat, Daddy. I never get anything that I want. And it's not fair, Daddy. Daddy, it's not fair. It's not fair. Daddy, it's not fair. Daddy, it's not fair.
That's it. I've had it. I'm coming after you, Veruca. I know you're in here somewhere, Veruca.
Daddy, no. Oh.
Where are you, Veruca? Veruca, Daddy's here. Veruca.
Oh, Daddy. Oh.
You can't turn into a blueberry and escape this. Veruca, where are you? Veruca!